here's the key of what fantasy is. What Tolkien says about it is that when we make a story, he actually doesn't say that we create a story. He's very specific about this. Mm-hmm. The key of fantasy for him is that we don't create a story. We can only sub-create a story. Mm-hmm. Okay? To say that you create something, if you think about it, is a very intense statement. Like, seriously, I'm going to create a story? Like, I didn't draw from anywhere? Like, if I give a theme in my story, I just pull that out from nowhere?
Yeah.
You know? Think about the discussions we've had before. That's impossible. We cannot give meaning to life, right? We don't make our own meaning. Right. Meaning is there.
Yeah.
The universe is as it is. Being is as it is.
Yeah.
What is. Think about this, okay? So that's what Tolkien says. As a story writer, you're actually a sub-creator. So for Tolkien, a fantasy novel is really like the epitome of all art, because it's true that in a fantasy novel, you're kind of creating a new world. Yeah. But we want to say sub-creating a new world.
Yeah.
So you're going to build the society, maybe even a fantastical race of beings like elves and like dwarves, which, you know, they've kind of been around for a long time. Like, there's something about like reaching out and thinking about hypothetical creatures, you know?
Yeah.
Because you want, the imagination is such that you want to see, oh, well, maybe life could have been this way, or maybe a society could live in this fashion. But when you sub-create the way that they're going to live, it's only going to be satisfying if it rings true in a more fundamental sense. Mm-hmm. So what Tolkien says is that the story needs to make intrinsic sense. It's not like you can just make anything up and that it would be fulfilling, or that it would ring true, or that it would be appealing.
Yeah. Because
you can just make up, you know, stupid stuff that has no bearing in reality in a more fundamental sense.
Yeah.
So, like, when we read his stories, let me try to be more specific. Reading his stories in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess there's no such thing as hobbits. I guess there's no such thing as elves and so on. But the whole story totally made sense in a moral kind of way. Like the decisions that Bilbo makes, the way that he acts, the courage that we see in Aragorn, right? The sacrifice that we see in Sam, the wisdom that we see in Gandalf. Is all that fantastical? Is all that nonfiction? No. It's very true.
Yeah.
And it's very remarkable. And here's the other thing that Tolkien says. And by the way, when I say that he says this, he really explains his craft in a very important essay that everybody listening to this right now should actually stop right now and go read. His essay is called On Fairy Stories. And this is like where he's the most open about like what he's all about, like what his stories are about. On Fairy Stories. We'll put a link in the description. Mm-hmm. But again, so what he says is that the story is going to be successful. We know that the fantasy writer is successful if the reader desires that there's a certain desirability to the world that is being portrayed, right? Because if it's desirable, that means that it's resonating with what is good, right? So, okay, sure, it's elves, it's dwarves, it's hobbits. Oh, they're not real. Okay, right. But the whole point is that we're looking at the story taking place in this different realm, and we can see what may be true about it. So yeah. It's a better way to analyze the deeper realities in nature.
Yeah.
If I make a story that is just about us, like in our everyday life, it becomes a little bit more complicated to reach into those deeper realities, because we're kind of distracted in a way of things that are already, he calls it this certain triteness that occurs with non-fantastical stories. We think we get it because it's the world in which we live. And so we are not compelled in a way to reach into the things that make the story true. I guess that's a better way to put it. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's fantastical. Oh, okay, well, let me reach in and figure out what is true about it.
Yeah.
So It's an easier way to reach into the deeper questions that we ask ourselves in life. Mm-hmm. Here's I sometimes wonder, and this is connected to fantasy. Mm-hmm. This is kind of the question that Tolkien is trying to grapple with. I sometimes wonder why it is that things are the way they are. I know this is like super like in-depth here, right? Like, why is it that we even exist, right? We wake up in the morning, we get up out of bed, we should be astounded by every single thing that we see. We walk outside and we see the sun. Gosh, why, the sun, and like Tolkien talks about this in his essay, like, oh, it's a yellow sun. I wonder, what if it had been a green sun? Mm-hmm. That thought, to say, oh, that could have been a green sun. You're now in the fantastical realm. You are now in what he calls fairy. Fairy is this, he calls it the perilous land. Yeah. It's the land where you kind of imagine things in a different way. And why is that important? Because it actually makes all the more wonderful the fact that we actually have a sun that is yellow. Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of a weird thing. If we just kind of wake up every day and we see the same yellow sun every day, what happens? What's the phrase? Familiarity breeds, have you heard this, Al? Familiarity breeds contempt. Have you heard that phrase?
Yeah, I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
Guys, listen. Familiarity breeds contempt. We're done here. Let's pack it up. Let's go. That's the point. Think about it. Follow that train of thought. Familiarity breeds contempt. Exactly. So what you do is you go and write a story about a green sun. Right? I sound like a crazy person right now.
No, I like where you're going with this.
You go and you write a story about a green sun and purple grass and all this other stuff. Now, when we write it, we're going to try to look at other deeper truths and such. Okay, yeah. That's true. But the point is, okay, here's the point. The job of the fantasy writer is for people to fall in love with that world.
Yeah.
Because when you go into that world and you see the green sun and the purple grass mm-hmm. and the scarlet trees, and you see them for the first time and you're amazed.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, wow, look at this green sun. It's so beautiful. Look at this world. It's beautiful. Kind of like when you first were aware of this world. Yeah. And you looked at this world and you fell in love with this world. Uh-huh. And you wonder, why is this world the way that it is? Yeah. Why is being the way that it is? It's an astounding truth.
Yeah. And it's,
so then going to that world, you kind of take a break from this one. Mm-hmm. So that when you come back to this one, you see it with fresh eyes again, and you keep a state of wonder. Mm-hmm. What Tolkien is trying to do to the reader is to reawaken this primal thing that is in our heart, that we should be in wonder at the world. Mm-hmm. And one of the best ways to do that is to that the fantasy writer is doing us a solid here in helping us to kind of keep that sense fresh. That's his artistry, and that's why he's so amazing.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think that leads into goes back to kind of creating a world, right? And it's so great to see a creation like that.
Yeah.
But only because it has evidence and it has, the roots of our own creator.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And those stories, his stories are not beautiful because he made them up.
Yes.
They're beautiful because he was aware of the beauty of our world uh-huh. and wanted to subcreate it
that's
into
right.
this world.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really cool.
No, right.
And it could lead into then, we talk again about us being created in the image of God.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And that's cool. Yeah. Like that's when you when you have art that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Like that's when you really see, whether it's a song, whether it's a story, whether it's whatever. You kind of start to see how we are sons and daughters, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to get super into that, but But it's, I don't know. It just gives me chills thinking about it.
No, I know, and that you make that point that you're only going to fall in love with that world if there's something that is actually true at a deepest level, right? And that's really the point. So, fantasy writer, fiction writer. No, I don't know. I wouldn't call it fiction. I prefer his term, which is fantasy or a fairy story.
Yeah.
A fairy story is a story that you go into what he calls the perilous realm, where you awaken a sense of wonder. And it's not a false thing. It's not a fictional thing. It's a very, very real thing.
So. Awesome.